My name is Claire, and before I tell you about the night I gave a toast that detonated my entire family, I want you to picture the perfect couple. The ones who hold hands after 40 years, who finish each other's sentences, who built a life that everyone else envied. That was my parents, Richard and Helen. For their 40th anniversary, they told everyone they only wanted one thing, for their family to be whole and happy again. But what they really wanted was my silence, my forgiveness, and my ex-husband's money. They were about to find out that while I was willing to give up my marriage to protect my dignity, I wasn't willing to give up my dignity to protect their retirement fund. The toast I was about to give wasn't a peace offering. It was a declaration of war, funded by the very man who broke my heart. Before I reveal how a secret recording and a surprise foundation blew up my family's perfect party, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt like your own feelings were dismissed as inconvenient by the very people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Now let's get into the story. It all started, as these things often do, with a lie wrapped in the prettiest paper imaginable. The end of my world didn't come with a bang. It came with the whisper of a zipper and the cloying scent of a perfume that wasn't mine. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I'd come home early from my job as a landscape architect, clutching a bouquet of peonies I'd bought on a whim. Mark, my husband of 6 years, was supposed to be in Chicago for a 3-day conference. His flight wasn't due back until Thursday, but his car was in the driveway, a sleek silver testament to his success in corporate finance, parked at a slightly careless angle. My first thought wasn't suspicion. It was a flutter of affection. He'd come home early to surprise me. I unlocked the front door, the scent of the peonies filling our pristine minimalist foyer. It was a home I had designed, every line clean, every space intentional. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. "Mark," I called out, a smile in my voice. "You're back early." The silence that answered was heavy, wrong. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses in on you. I set the flowers on the polished concrete console table and walked further into the house. A man's jacket was slung over the back of a dining chair, not his usual meticulous placement on the hanger in the closet. A single wine glass, stained with red, sat on the kitchen island next to a second, empty one. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I crept up the floating oak staircase, my hand trailing on the cool metal rail. The door to our bedroom was ajar, and that's when I heard it, a soft, feminine laugh. It wasn't a sound of friendship or platonic joy. It was intimate, a murmur meant for only one other person. And then his voice, low and familiar. My stomach clenched. I pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me is burned into my memory like a brand. The tangled sheets, the clothes strewn on the floor. Mark, my Mark, was there, and with him was Amelia, my cousin, my shadow since childhood, the girl I had protected, championed, and loved like a sister. She was wearing one of my silk robes. My blood ran cold, then hot, a sickening tide of disbelief and white-hot fury. They froze, their faces a grotesque tableau of shock. Amelia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mark just stared at me, his expression not of guilt, but of a man caught in a minor inconvenience, like a speeding ticket. "Claire," he said, his voice a hoarse croak, "it's not what it looks like." It was the most pathetic, most insulting cliché he could have possibly uttered. The peonies I'd been so excited about suddenly seemed like a mockery. The home I had built felt like a stage set for my own humiliation. "Get out," I whispered, the words barely audible. Amelia scrambled for her clothes, her face streaked with tears that I knew were for herself, not for me. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just gathered her things and fled, a phantom of betrayal disappearing down the stairs. I was left alone with Mark, the architect of my ruin. The confrontation that followed was a blur of his pathetic excuses and my shattered silence. He tried to tell me it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. He said Amelia had been going through a tough time and had leaned on him for support. The idea of him offering my own cousin support in our marital bed was so vile, so twisted, that it broke through my shock. I started laughing, a raw, ugly sound that seemed to tear its way out of my throat. "A tough time?" I finally managed to say, my voice dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "And you decided the best way to help her was to violate our marriage, our home, and my trust in our bed?" He had no answer for that. He just stood there, a deflated caricature of the powerful man he projected to the world. The days that followed were a cold gray fog. The conversation with Amelia was even worse. We met in a sterile coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso beans and regret. She cried, of course. She'd said she had always looked up to me, that she was so sorry. "I don't know what happened, Claire," she whimpered, twisting a napkin into shreds. "He was just so persuasive, and I was lonely." Her apology was all about her loneliness, her weakness, his persuasiveness. I was just a casualty in her sad little drama. There was no ownership, no real remorse for the depth of her betrayal. She had been my maid of honor. I had held her when her first boyfriend broke her heart. And she had repaid that lifetime of love by sleeping with my husband in my bed. "I think you do know what happened, Amelia," I said, my voice flat and dead. "You made a choice, and now we all have to live with it." I stood up and walked out, leaving her sitting there with her performative tears. The divorce was swift, if not painless. I hired the best lawyer I could find, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Catherine, who seemed immune to Mark's manufactured charm. Mark, ever conscious of his public image and the potential damage to his firm, wanted it all handled quietly. He agreed to a generous settlement, a silent transaction to purchase my discretion. The money felt dirty, like blood money paid for the death of my life as I knew it. It sat in my bank account, a huge, intimidating number that I couldn't bear to look at. It was the price of my pain, and I had no idea what to do with it. My parents, Richard and Helen, were initially the picture of supportive, grieving parents. My mother brought over casseroles I didn't eat. My father called me every day, his voice laced with manufactured sympathy. "We're so sorry, sweetheart," my mother would say, patting my hand. "That boy, I don't know what got into him. And Amelia, your aunt and uncle are just devastated. They played their parts perfectly. They were on my side, or so I thought. The shift was subtle at first. It started about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. My mother called, her voice bright and breezy. "Claire, honey, I was just thinking. Mark called your father yesterday, just to see how we were doing. Isn't that nice of him?" I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Nice? Mom, he's the man who cheated on me with my cousin. There's nothing nice about him." There was a slight pause on her end. "Well, he was always so good to us, wasn't he? Remember that time he took us all to Italy? So generous." I could hear the real narrative beginning to form, the careful rewriting of history. Mark the villain was slowly being edited, into Mark the generous, if flawed, benefactor. A week later, it was my father's turn. "Claire, I need to talk to you about something important," he said, his tone serious. "You know that condo we were looking at in Florida for our retirement? The one down in Naples?" I knew it well. It was all they had talked about for the last 2 years. It was their dream, the prize at the end of their long working lives. "Mark was going to help us with the down payment," he said, his voice dropping. "He had this investment portfolio he was managing for us. A significant portion of our retirement was tied up with his guidance. Now that you two are, now that things are different, it's all up in the air. He's not returning my calls about it." The cold knot in my stomach tightened into a block of ice. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. It was about their condo in Naples. It was about the lifestyle they had grown accustomed to, a lifestyle significantly enhanced by their wealthy son-in-law. My pain, my betrayal, my public humiliation, it was all just an inconvenient obstacle to their comfortable retirement. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're upset because my divorce is complicating your financial plans?" My father sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Don't be so dramatic, Claire. Of course, we're upset for you. But this is a practical matter. He was part of the family. His resources were part of the family's resources. We just need to find a way to smooth things over." "Smooth things over?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Dad, he slept with Amelia in my house. There's no smoothing this over." The line went quiet for a moment. Then my mother's voice came on the extension. She must have been listening the whole time. "Claire, darling," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "your father is just worried. Mark feels terrible, truly. He told your father he made the biggest mistake of his life. People make mistakes. Families forgive. It's what we do." I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if the world had tilted on its axis. They weren't on my side. They were on the side of their retirement plan. I was just a variable in their financial equation, and my feelings were messing up the calculation. I had spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter. I got good grades. I went to a good college. I built a respectable career. I married a man they approved of, a man whose wealth reflected well on them. I did everything right. And in my darkest moment, when I needed their unconditional love the most, they were looking at me and seeing a spreadsheet with a negative balance. That conversation was the first crack in the foundation of my world. I didn't know it then, but it was also the moment I subconsciously started gathering my own resources, building my own fortress. The dirty money in my bank account suddenly felt a little different. It wasn't just the price of my pain anymore. It was starting to feel like the source of my power. The idea was still nascent, a tiny spark in the darkness, but it was there. My parents wanted me to fix their problem. And I was beginning to realize that the only way to fix it was to burn their entire selfish world to the ground. The planning for their 40th anniversary party had just begun, and they had no idea that I was already planning a celebration of my own. The pressure campaign intensified as winter thawed into a damp, uncertain spring. The 40th anniversary party, scheduled for June, became the focal point of all their efforts. It was no longer just a celebration of their marriage. It was the deadline for my capitulation. They spoke of it in grand, sweeping terms, a momentous occasion that required a flawless presentation of family unity. My broken heart was a smudge on their perfect portrait, and they were determined to wipe it clean. The calls became more frequent, each one a carefully calibrated assault. My mother would handle the emotional front. "Claire,
"I ran into Mark's mother at the grocery store," she'd say, her voice oozing with feigned sadness. "She looks so tired, so worried. This whole thing has been so hard on their family too, you know." The implication was clear. My refusal to forgive was a selfish act, causing ripples of pain that extended far beyond just me. She was a master at this, framing my self-preservation as cruelty. My father, Richard, was the closer. He dealt in blunt, pragmatic threats disguised as fatherly advice. "I had a chat with Bill Henderson from the club," he said one evening, his voice low and conspiratorial. "He mentioned Mark was sponsoring the annual golf tournament again. The man is everywhere, Claire. You can't just erase him. It's not smart. In our world, connections are everything. Burning a bridge with a man like Mark, it's just not strategic." Our world. He said it as if we were a feudal dynasty and I was a petulant princess, refusing a politically advantageous alliance. It was never about my well-being. It was about strategy, about maintaining their social and financial standing. The true escalation came when they started trying to orchestrate accidental run-ins. I went to my favorite bookstore one Saturday, a little haven of quiet I'd been retreating to. As I browsed the art history section, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Claire, what a surprise." It was Mark. He was standing there, holding a book on architectural theory, looking handsome and apologetic. It was too perfect, too staged. I felt my blood run cold. I saw my mother's car parked across the street as I left, her silhouette briefly visible before she ducked down. They had set me up. I didn't say a word to him. I just turned and walked away, my hands shaking. The final straw in this slow burn torture was the invitation to the anniversary party. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, thick and expensive, my name written in my mother's elegant calligraphy. Tucked inside, behind the main invitation, was a smaller handwritten note. "Dearest Claire," it read, "we know this is hard, but it would mean the world to us if you could find it in your heart to let bygones be bygones. We have invited Mark and Amelia. It is time for our family to heal. Your presence and your grace would be the greatest gift you could give us. Love, Mom." They had invited them. Not only had they invited the man who shattered my life, but they had invited my cousin, the co-conspirator in my betrayal. They were forcing my hand, creating a public spectacle where I would be cornered. If I didn't go, I was the ungrateful, bitter daughter who ruined her parents' special day. If I went and caused a scene, I was the hysterical, unstable ex-wife. If I went and played along, I was validating their narrative, swallowing my pain for their comfort. They had built a perfect trap. I called Jenna, my best friend since college, and read her the note, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like a physical force. Jenna was a journalist, and her bullshit detector was finely tuned. "Oh, hell no," she said, her voice sharp. "No, Claire. This is not about healing. This is about them wanting to have their cake and eat it too. They want Mark's money, and they want to look like a perfect, forgiving family. You are a prop in their little play." "What do I do, Jenna?" I asked, feeling helpless. "They've got me boxed in." "No, they don't," she said firmly. "You have the one thing they can't control, the truth. And you have a hell of a lot of screw-you money sitting in your bank account. It's time to stop playing defense and start thinking about your own strategy." Her words were like a splash of cold water. Strategy. My father was always talking about strategy. Maybe it was time I started applying it to my own life. A few days later, my parents requested my presence for dinner. Just the three of us, my mother had trilled over the phone, a proper family chat before the big party. I knew with chilling certainty that this was it. This was the final push, the moment they would lay all their cards on the table. As I drove to their house, the house I grew up in, a cold resolve settled over me. I took my phone out of my purse and placed it in the side pocket of my jacket. I opened the voice memo app and pressed the red button. I didn't know exactly what they were going to say, but I had a feeling it was something I would need to remember, something the world might need to hear. The house smelled of roast chicken and old resentments. My father poured me a glass of wine I didn't want. My mother fussed over the table, her movements brittle and anxious. They made small talk through dinner, a tense performance of normalcy that made my skin crawl. Then, as my mother cleared the plates, my father leaned forward, his elbows on the polished mahogany table. The intervention had begun. "Claire," he started, his voice the epitome of paternal reason, "your mother and I are worried about you. This anger you're holding on to, it's not healthy. And frankly, it's becoming a problem." "My anger is a problem?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. "Not Mark's infidelity? Not Amelia's betrayal? My anger is the problem?" "It is when it affects the entire family," my mother said, returning from the kitchen and sitting down. She reached across the table, her fingers cold on my arm. "We are a family. We rise and fall together. And right now, you are dragging us down with you." The sheer audacity of her statement took my breath away. "Dragging you down? I'm the one who was betrayed. I'm the one who has to see their faces everywhere, who has to listen to people whisper about me at the club, who has to live with what they did." "And you think you're the only one?" my father shot back, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? Our daughter's marriage falling apart so spectacularly, our niece involved, and the financial implications. Claire, you're not a child. You understand how the world works. Mark was a key part of our retirement. He had a plan for us, a very generous plan. That plan is now gone because you can't seem to find a little bit of compassion." The word compassion hung in the air between us, obscene and twisted. They wanted me to have compassion for the man who broke his vows to me, so their retirement could stay on track. The cold, hard weight of my phone in my pocket felt like an anchor in the storm of their madness. My mother saw the look on my face and switched tactics, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. "We just want our happy family back," she sobbed. "We want to be able to sit down for Christmas dinner, all of us together. Is it so much to ask? For your father and me, after 40 years of marriage, to have our family whole? Your pain is so selfish, Claire. Can't you see that? Can you, for one night, for our anniversary, put it aside? Your dignity is a small price to pay for our comfort, for the family's peace." There it was, the line, the absolute unforgivable truth of their position. My dignity was a commodity, a small price to pay for their comfort. My phone, nestled safely in my pocket, captured every poisonous, self-serving word. The recording was clean. It was damning. It was perfect. I felt a strange calm descend over me. The anger and the pain were still there, but they were now overlaid with a crystalline clarity. I finally saw them for who they were, not as my parents, but as two deeply selfish people who saw their daughter as a means to an end. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. I stood up from the table. "You've given me a lot to think about. I'll be at the party, and I'll even give a toast." Their faces lit up with relief and triumph. They thought they had won. My father clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of proud ownership. My mother hugged me, her tears of manipulation magically gone. "Oh, Claire, I knew you'd understand," she whispered. "You were always such a good girl." I walked out of that house and into the cool night air, the recording a hot secret weight in my pocket. A good girl. That's what I had always been. But as I got into my car and drove away, I knew that girl was gone forever. In her place was a woman with a plan, a substantial bank account, and a recording that would burn their comfortable world to the ground. The toast I was going to give at their party would indeed be a gift. It would be the gift of truth. And I was going to deliver it in a way they would never, ever forget. The weeks leading up to the anniversary party were a strange mix of quiet fury and meticulous planning. On the surface, I was the dutiful daughter they believed they had successfully browbeaten into submission. I answered their calls with a newfound placid politeness that they mistook for compliance. I discussed party details with my mother, offering opinions on floral arrangements and catering choices. Each conversation felt like a scene from a spy movie. Me, the deep cover agent, gathering intelligence while plotting a coup. They were so blinded by their own self-interest, so certain of their victory, that they couldn't see the steel hardening in my spine. My first call was to Catherine, my divorce lawyer. I met her in her sleek downtown office, the city skyline, a backdrop of ambition and power. I played her the recording. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. When it was over, she leaned back in her leather chair and let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said, her professional mask slipping for a moment. "That's breathtakingly awful. Financial coercion is a nasty business, Claire, especially when it's family." "I want to do something," I said, the plan that had been forming in my mind finally taking shape. "I want to use the settlement money, all of it. I want to start a foundation." Catherine's eyebrows shot up. "A foundation for what?" "For women like me," I explained, the words pouring out of me now. "Not just women who've been cheated on. Women who are trapped in relationships or families because of money. Women who are told their dignity is a small price to pay for someone else's comfort. I want to provide grants for education, for starting businesses, for legal fees. I want to give them an escape route, a way out." Catherine's professional demeanor returned, but her eyes were alight with something new. Respect. "That's a powerful idea, Claire. A very powerful idea." We spent the next 2 hours mapping it out. The legal structure, the articles of incorporation, the mission statement. She brought in a colleague who specialized in nonprofits. They were energized, efficient, and deeply supportive. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a sense of purpose that wasn't defined by my pain. I was building something from the wreckage. We needed a name. I thought about it for a long time. I wanted something that would be a constant, private reminder of why I was doing this. A monument to the moment my illusions about my parents shattered. "I have a name," I told Catherine during our next meeting. "I want to call it the Hearthstone Foundation." My parents' home, the one where they delivered their ultimatum, was on Hearthstone Lane. It was the place where they had redefined the meaning of home for me, from a place of safety to a place of transaction. The name was a secret, a quiet act of rebellion that only I would understand. Or so I thought at the time. While Catherine and her team handled the legal paperwork, I worked with a financial advisor to structure the endowment. The number from the divorce settlement, once so intimidating, was now a tool. I watched as large sums were moved, allocated, and invested, not with a sense of loss, but with a growing feeling of empowerment. Every dollar was a brick in the new life I was building for myself and for others. My best friend Jenna was my co-conspirator and my rock. She was the only one I told about the full plan, including the toast and the recording. We spent hours in her cozy, cluttered apartment, fueled by coffee and righteous indignation. She helped me craft the speech, making sure it was sharp, elegant, and devastating. "You can't sound hysterical," she advised, pacing her living room. "You have to be calm, colder than them. You have to deliver it like a surgeon, clean cuts, no wasted motion." She also helped me with the technical aspects. "The sound system at the country club will be for their microphone," she said, tapping her chin. "You can't risk them cutting you off. You need your own sound source." We went online and bought a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker, one that could fit in my evening bag. We tested it with the recording, my parents' cruel words filling Jenna's apartment. Hearing them again in this safe space solidified my resolve. Any lingering doubts, any whispers of "they're still your parents," were silenced by the raw, undeniable evidence of their greed. The week before the party, everything was in place. The Hearthstone Foundation was officially incorporated. The initial endowment was transferred. I had a small, leather-bound portfolio prepared by Catherine's office containing the foundation's official documents and a press release that Jenna had helped me write. It was my ammunition. The day of the party, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The anxiety was still there, a hummingbird in my chest, but it was overlaid with a profound sense of purpose. I took my time getting ready. I chose a dress with care, a simple, elegant column of dark emerald green. It was a color of growth, of rebirth. It was also a color that would stand out. I didn't want to blend in. I wanted to be seen. As I was doing my makeup, my mother called. Her voice was giddy with excitement. "Claire, it's going to be a wonderful night. Everyone is coming. Mark just called to say he's on his way. And Amelia is coming with her parents. Isn't it wonderful? We're all going to be together again." "Wonderful," I echoed, my voice smooth as glass. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same woman who had cried on the floor of her empty house a year ago. The hurt was still there, a fine lacework of scars beneath the surface, but it was no longer my defining feature. I was not a victim anymore. I was a founder. I packed my evening bag with surgical precision, my phone fully charged, the portable speaker also fully charged, the leather portfolio with the foundation documents, a small card with the key points of my speech, though I knew I wouldn't need it. The words were engraved on my heart. When I arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club, the party was in full swing. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering gowns and dark tuxedos, bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. My parents had spared no expense. They were greeting guests near the entrance, my mother in a sequined gown that was a little too young for her, my father beaming in his tuxedo. They looked like the king and queen of their own little kingdom. My mother saw me and rushed over, her face a mask of triumphant joy. "Claire, you look stunning. I'm so glad you're here." She hugged me tightly, a possessive public display of affection. "See?" she whispered in my ear. "Everything is going to be all right. I knew you would do the right thing." "I always do, Mom," I said, pulling away gently. I saw them across the room. Mark was holding a glass of champagne, looking effortlessly charming as he laughed with some of my father's business associates. He caught my eye and gave a small, hopeful smile, as if we were co-conspirators in this farce. My stomach turned. And near the bar, talking to her own parents, was Amelia. She looked pale and nervous, clutching her drink like a lifeline. She saw me looking and quickly glanced away. Good. Let her be nervous. For the next hour, I played the part. I mingled. I accepted condolences on my divorce with a serene smile. I chatted with aunts and uncles who told me how wonderful it was that I was being so mature about everything. every polite conversation, every fake smile felt like winding a watch tighter and tighter. The tension was building, coiling inside me. I was a bomb, ticking silently in the middle of their perfect party, and the countdown was about to end. Dinner was served, speeches were made by old friends, and then my father tapped his glass for attention. "And now," he announced, his voice booming with pride, "for a very special toast, our daughter Claire would like to say a few words." He winked at me, a grotesque gesture of complicity. My mother beamed, squeezing my hand under the table. They thought this was their moment of victory. They had no idea they had just handed me the microphone for their own execution. I took a slow, deep breath, picked up my champagne flute, and walked towards the podium. The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. The show was about to begin. The ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club was suffocatingly opulent. It felt like being inside a gilded cage. Massive floral arrangements, heavy with lilies and roses, perfumed the air with a scent that was both sweet and funereal. The clinking of cutlery on fine china had subsided, replaced by an expectant hush. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on me as I approached the small elevated podium. My parents' friends, their business associates, our extended family. They were all here, witnesses to what they believed would be a touching moment of reconciliation. My father, Richard, gave me a proud, proprietary smile from the head table. My mother, Helen, dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, a perfect portrait of maternal emotion. She looked at Mark, who was seated a few tables away, and gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. They were so sure of themselves, so certain they had orchestrated this moment to perfection. The arrogance was a physical presence in the room. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady as I placed my champagne flute on the lectern. I let my gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of aunts, uncles, and cousins. I saw Amelia, looking down at her plate, her posture radiating guilt. I saw Mark, who had the audacity to offer me a small sympathetic smile, and I saw my parents, basking in the reflected glory of their perceived success. They had wrangled their difficult, emotional daughter back into line. The family brand was secure. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and calm, just as Jenna and I had practiced. It didn't waver. "It's an honor to be here tonight to celebrate 40 years of my parents' marriage. 40 years. That's an incredible milestone, a testament to a partnership built on deeply held, shared values." My parents beamed. A few people in the audience murmured their approval. This was going exactly as they'd all expected. The prodigal daughter returned to the fold. "Growing up," I continued, letting a thoughtful pause hang in the air, "my parents taught me so many important lessons. They taught me about the importance of family. They taught me about loyalty, and most recently, they taught me a very powerful lesson about sacrifice. They taught me that in a family, sometimes personal feelings have to be put aside for the greater good." I glanced at my father. He was nodding vigorously, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. This was his philosophy, the one he'd been hammering into me for months. "They taught me that some things are simply more important than others," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the room in. "That a comfortable retirement, for instance, is more important than a daughter's pain. That financial security is more important than integrity. They taught me, in a very direct and honest conversation just a few weeks ago, that a daughter's dignity is a small price to pay for their comfort." A ripple of confusion went through the room. A few people shifted in their seats. The smiles on my parents' faces froze, becoming brittle masks of bewilderment. My father's nod stuttered to a halt. He was starting to realize this was not the speech he had commissioned. "I know that might sound shocking to some of you," I said, my tone still conversational. "So I thought it would be best if you heard it directly from them." With a steady hand, I reached into my evening bag and took out my phone and the small black portable speaker. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. I placed the speaker on the lectern, its modern minimalist design a stark contrast to the club's chintzy opulence. I tapped my phone's screen, and a sudden, sharp silence fell over the ballroom as the recording began to play. My own voice, quiet and strained, came first. "So let me get this straight. You're upset because my divorce is complicating your financial plans?" Then my father's voice, clear and damning, echoed through the room. "Don't be so dramatic, Claire. Of course, we're upset for you. But this is a practical matter. He was part of the family. His resources were part of the family's resources. We just need to find a way to smooth things over." A collective gasp swept through the audience. People turned to stare at my father, whose face had gone from ruddy to a pasty, mottled white. He looked like he'd been punched. Then came my mother's syrupy, manipulative tones. "Your pain is so selfish, Claire. Can't you see that? Can't you, for one night, for our anniversary, put it aside?" And then the final brutal line, the one that had become my mantra. My mother's voice, full of saccharine reason, filled every corner of the silent room. "Your dignity is a small price to pay for our comfort, for the family's peace." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. You could hear a pin drop. Every single person was staring at my parents, their expressions a mixture of horror, pity, and disgust. My mother's face was a crumpled mess, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. My father looked apoplectic, his jaw working but no sounds coming out. They were exposed, their ugly, selfish motives laid bare for their entire world to see. I let the silence hang for a few more seconds, twisting the knife. Then I picked up my champagne flute. "So, in honor of that powerful lesson," I announced, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "I decided to give a gift that truly reflects the values they've taught me. As many of you know, my divorce from Mark," I paused and looked directly at him, his face a mask of pure shock, "was finalized earlier this year. It came with a rather significant settlement." I reached into my bag again and pulled out the leather portfolio. "I've decided to use that money to create something meaningful. A gift in my parents' name to commemorate this special occasion. Tonight, I am officially launching the Hearthstone Foundation." I opened the portfolio and held up the first page, the foundation's mission statement printed in bold, elegant type. The Hearthstone Foundation, funded entirely by my divorce settlement, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to a single cause, providing financial grants and legal support to women seeking to escape situations of financial abuse and coercion. For women who are told that their dignity is a commodity to be traded for someone else's comfort. The shock in the room curdled into something else. Awe. Understanding. A low murmur started to build. "I have made the first donation myself," I continued, my voice soaring over the whispers. "A very substantial one. And I have made it in honor of my parents, Richard and Helen, for teaching me exactly what a woman needs to be fighting for." I raised my glass high. "So please join me in a toast. To my parents on their 40th anniversary and to their legacy, the Hearthstone Foundation. Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad." I took a sip of my champagne. The bubbles tasted like victory. The room was frozen. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father slammed his fist on the table, a loud thud that made several people jump. He surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. "How dare you!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "How dare you!" But his outrage was drowned out by a smattering of applause. It started with one person, an old friend of my grandmother's, then another, and then another. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough. It was validation. I placed my glass back on the lectern, picked up my phone and speaker, and slid them into my bag. I didn't look at my parents again. I didn't need to. I had said everything I needed to say. With my head held high, I walked away from the podium, through the parting sea of stunned guests, and out of the ballroom. The cool night air hit my face like a benediction. I had walked into that party a victim. I walked out a founder, and I was free. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut behind me, muffling the explosion of chaos I had ignited. The sounds were still audible, a man's furious shouting, my father's voice, and a high-pitched, wailing cry that could only belong to my mother. But they felt distant, like a storm passing over a faraway hill. I didn't run. I walked, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the polished marble floor of the country club's foyer. Each step felt lighter than the last. The immense weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their conditional love was gone. It had been replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating emptiness. I handed the valet my ticket, my hand perfectly steady. As I waited for my car, the adrenaline began to recede, and the shaking started. It began in my hands and spread through my entire body, a tremor of pure, unadulterated release. A doorman, a kind-faced man with gray hair, gave me a concerned look. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked. I managed a smile, a real one this time. "I've never been better," I said, and the surprising thing was, I meant it. My car pulled up, and I slid into the driver's seat. Before I could even put the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. All caps. A torrent of rage and disbelief. "You have humiliated this family. You are no daughter of mine. Do not ever contact us again." I read the words without emotion. It was what I expected. I deleted the message without replying. Then came a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the notification popped up. I pressed play, a morbid curiosity compelling me to listen. Her voice was a hysterical shriek, barely coherent. "Claire, how could you? After everything we've done, you've ruined us. Ruined us. Everyone is staring. They're all talking. What have you done to us?" The message was a frantic loop of us, us, us. Not once did she mention my pain, Mark's affair, or Amelia's betrayal. Even now, her only concern was their public image. I deleted the voicemail. Then the texts from the extended family began to pour in. It was a deluge of conflicting emotions. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. "That was a disgusting, selfish spectacle. Your parents are devastated." My Uncle Robert, Amelia's father. "You have a lot of nerve. Amelia is a mess." But then, a message from my younger cousin, Sarah. "OMG, Claire, that was the most badass thing I have ever seen. Call me." And another from my late grandmother's best friend, Mrs. Gable, the woman who had started the applause. "Your grandmother would have been so proud of you tonight, dear. She always said you had a steel spine. It seems she was right." I drove, not to my empty, silent house, but to Jenna's. The city lights blurred past my window, a watercolor of motion and life. It felt like I was seeing the world for the first time, not as Mark's wife or Richard and Helen's daughter, but just as Claire. When I pulled up to her apartment building, she was already waiting on the curb, a coat thrown over her pajamas. She opened the passenger door and just looked at me for a second before breaking into a huge grin. "So," she said, "how did it go?" I started to laugh, and once I started, I couldn't stop. It wasn't a happy laugh or a sad laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated catharsis. Tears streamed down my face as I gasped for air, the tension of the last year finally breaking. Jenna just climbed into the car and hugged me, letting me shake and cry and laugh until I was empty. Upstairs in her apartment, we ordered pizza and opened a bottle of cheap champagne. We blocked my parents' numbers from my phone. It felt like a sacred ritual, severing the final toxic cord. We read through the texts from my family, analyzing each one like field notes from a disaster zone. Jenna was particularly delighted by the message from Mrs. Gable. "See? The old guard knows what's up," she said, raising her pizza slice in a toast. "Steel spine. I love it." The story of the party spread like wildfire through our town's social circles. My parents, who had lived their lives obsessed with appearances, had become the subjects of gossip and pity. They tried to do damage control, of course. They told people I was unstable, grieving, not in my right mind. They claimed the foundation was a cry for help, but the recording was an inconvenient truth they couldn't spin. The few people my father tried to complain to had apparently gone silent, uncomfortable, not wanting to get involved. Their perfect world of polite society had turned on them. They were social pariahs. A few weeks later, a formal-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was from a law firm. Inside was a letter from my parents, disowning me. It was a cold, legalistic document, full of stilted phrases about irreparable damage to the family reputation and emotional distress. It formally requested that I cease using their names in any association with my provocative and ill-conceived foundation. I just laughed and passed the letter to Catherine, who filed it away. The biggest surprise was a message from Mark. It came late one night, a long, rambling email. He apologized. He said the toast was a brutal wake-up call. He said hearing my parents' words made him realize the toxic, transactional world he had been a part of. He said he and Amelia had broken up, that the public humiliation had shattered whatever flimsy connection they had. He even said he was proud of what I was doing with the foundation. I didn't reply. His redemption was not my responsibility. His journey was his own. My path was finally, completely separate from his. The falling action was over. The dust was settling, and in the quiet that remained, I could finally start to hear my own voice. A year can change everything. 12 months after that explosive anniversary party, I was sitting in a sunlit office that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. It was the headquarters of the Hearthstone Foundation. It wasn't large or fancy, just a few rooms in a modest building, but it was ours. The walls were covered in corkboards filled with plans, success stories, and thank you notes. The quiet hum of activity from my small team was the most satisfying sound I had ever known. The foundation was more successful than I had ever dreamed. Jenna had used her media savvy to get our story picked up by a national news outlet, and the attention brought in a wave of private donations. People from all over the country, moved by the mission, sent what they could. The money from my divorce had been the seed, but the foundation was now growing on its own, nurtured by the generosity of strangers who understood the quiet desperation of being financially trapped. Our first grant recipient was a woman named Maria. She was a mother of two who had a brilliant idea for a catering business, but was married to a man who controlled every penny she earned as a waitress. He told her she was foolish, that she didn't have a head for business, that she should be grateful for what he provided. It was a familiar refrain.
We gave her a grant to buy equipment and get the necessary licenses. I met with her for coffee a few months later. She was radiant. Her business was thriving, and she had just signed the lease on her own apartment. "You didn't just give me money," she told me, her eyes shining with tears. "You gave me a voice. You made me believe I was worth investing in." Her words meant more to me than any apology from my family ever could. As for my family, the silence was deafening. I heard through the grapevine that my parents had to sell their house, the one on Hearthstone Lane. Their retirement plans had, as they feared, fallen through. They moved to a smaller condo in a less prestigious town, their social circle shattered. The public humiliation had been too much for their fragile egos. I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't guilt. It was a distant, clinical sadness for the people they could have been if they hadn't been so consumed by greed and appearances. About 6 months after the party, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. Her elegant handwriting was shaky now. It was a stilted, awkward apology, full of excuses and self-pity. She wrote that they may have been insensitive and that they missed their daughter. It was a transparent, clumsy attempt at reconciliation, likely prompted by loneliness and the dawning horror of their new reality. There was no mention of the Foundation's success or any real acknowledgement of the depth of their cruelty. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I never answered. Forgiveness was a gift, and it was one they hadn't earned. The relationship was over, and I was, to my own surprise, completely at peace with it. The final loose end was Amelia. She sent me an email much like Mark's, but filled with more raw desperation. She was working a retail job, living with her parents, her own social life in tatters. She said she was in therapy. She said she finally understood the damage she had done. I hoped, for her sake, that it was true. But her healing, like Mark's, was not my burden to carry. I wished her peace, and I let her go. My life now is quiet, full, and my own. I have my work, which brings me a profound sense of purpose. I have Jenna, my chosen family. I have a small circle of friends who love me for who I am, not for what I can provide. The scars from my marriage and my family are still there, but they no longer ache. They are just a part of my story, a reminder of the fire I walked through to get here. I learned that my worth is not determined by a man's fidelity or my parents' approval. It is inherent. It is mine. And so, my journey has brought me here, sharing this story with all of you. It's a story about betrayal and revenge, yes, but I hope it's also a story about transformation. It's about taking the most painful moments of your life and forging them into a source of strength, not just for yourself, but for others. I want you to share your stories in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over the expectations of your family? How did you find the strength to draw your own boundaries? Your experiences matter, and they can be a lifeline for someone else who is feeling lost. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your power. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening with such open hearts. I wish you all the strength in the world. Remember that family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is build a new home, a new hearth for yourself.